Welcome to the Building Community Climate Resiliency webinar. My name is Emily Halderson, and I'm the Resource Manager at the Manitoba Eco-Network. Today, I'm speaking to you from my home in Winnipeg's North End. I'm grateful to be living and working on Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This webinar is part of an ongoing project coordinated by the Manitoba Eco-Network to build and share knowledge on the topic of climate resiliency in Winnipeg. Originally, as many of you know, we'd intended to host an interactive in-person session to engage you all in a discussion on this topic. Due to the ongoing public health crisis, of course, this is no longer possible. So we've redesigned this initial phase of the project to include this webinar and also a follow-up survey, which we hope you'll all participate in. I will be giving you some more details about the survey at the end of this webinar and also some of our future plans for the project. So you should right away see the agenda up here on your screen. Over the next hour and a half, we're going to be hearing from a range of people who are working on climate resiliency issues. And so we ask if you have any questions during any of the presentations, you can write them in the Zoom chat box, and we'll be having a question and answer period after all of the presentations. If for any reason you have any problems with using the Zoom chat box, there's also a phone number for Glenn here on our screen. He's going to be doing the Q&A, so you can text your questions to that number as well. Another little note on technology, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen in Zoom, you can select gallery or speaker view. Most of the presenters are going to have a PowerPoint presentation that they'll be sharing with you. So if you like, you can click on speaker view and you'll have a smaller box in the corner there. It won't be obstructing the presentation as much. So first I'm going to pass it off to Glenn Corluck, Executive Director of the Manitoba Eco-Network, and Ali Caparelli, researcher, who she's also working for the Eco-Network. And Glenn will be providing a brief introduction into what the Eco-Network does, and Ali will be sharing the results of our pre-webinar survey, which many of you filled out.
Thank you, Emily, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. For those who don't know the Manitoba Eco-Network, we're a nonprofit charitable organization. We've been around for about 35 years. We have a volunteer board, and the organization has had its ups and downs over the last 3 decades. And right now, I like to think we're sort of on the up these days, even though we're amidst the COVID-19 crisis. But we've got a very enthusiastic and dedicated board, and the organization is doing some of the stuff it used to do in the past. That is like more networking, more policy advocacy, and some capacity building. The 2 main projects that we have on the go right now is this one, Building Community Climate Resiliency, and we're really happy to have all our panelists here today to share some important information on plans in the future for climate change adaptation. And our other main project is called the Environmental Toolkit Project, and that project, we're wanting to develop ways to engage more citizens and organizations in the environmental decision-making process, and also build some legal tools for the community. I would encourage you to go to our website. Every month we do put out an eco-bulletin, which is a monthly review of what's happening in the environmental community. It gives you good updates as to who's doing what. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors for this project, being Eco-Canada, the Government of Manitoba, the City of Winnipeg, the RBC Foundation, and the Winnipeg Foundation. So I hope you have a good morning, and I'll just pass it on to Ali right now.
Thanks, Glenn. Now I'm going to introduce the results of the pre-webinar survey. There were 3 questions, and I'm going to be looking at the primary and secondary topics that come up most with each question. Next slide. So our first question was, what is climate resilience? And in all of the word clouds that I'm going to be showing you, both climate and change are the largest words, but we want to look at some of the other things that have been popping up among responses. Next slide. So I've pulled out some of the largest words, and at a higher level, you were thinking about anticipated climate events. You were also concerned about community, about becoming aware of alternatives, about benefits, and the chance to become healthier. You were also concerned about policy, energy, and economic issues. And another word standing out is ability. Many of you were thinking about climate resilience in terms of the ability to meet the challenges. Okay, next slide. Here are some secondary words that were significant about climate resilience. You were thinking about unprecedented disruption, disturbance, disaster, and hazards. You were also thinking about infrastructure and development. And there were concerns about deforestation and green space, but you were also aware of possibility, choices, and design. Next slide. And here are some quotes from the first question that touch upon the important facets of climate resilience. An important theme is the ability to withstand the weather and climate shocks that occur from climate change. There is ability not only to recover, but to make positive changes going forward. And I would say that preparing for change in a thoughtful way is key to many responses. Next slide. For the second question, we asked about what climate resilience means to you personally. Next slide. On a closer look, we saw some repeated themes, but also new ideas. There's increased concern about degradation, infrastructure, and weather. And then the word impact becomes important. And there's also concern about access to what we need. Many of you cited special concerns for our northern location, and respondents also mentioned concerns about racial issues and whiteness. Next slide. Again, among secondary topics brought up in responses, there are still concerns about extreme and unforeseen events. There's attention to health, income, and housing. We also see more discussion of nature, particularly familiar nature like yards, trees, streams, and rivers. We see the first mentions of transit. And we also see, of course, a greater discussion of personal actions and influences. Trends, habits, lifestyle, effort, consequences, and measures are all terms that came up. You've identified that some of these behaviors toward ecology are wanton or careless. And you also mentioned the word reconcile. Next slide. Here are more quotes from the second question about personal meaning of climate change resilience. And as expected, the themes become more immediate to what is closest to you because you're trying to learn about how to think about climate resilience issues in day-to-day life. Next slide. The third question about climate resilience for your community delivers the greatest amount of detail among popular responses. And the community level offers the most points of entry to address climate resilience. Next slide. The details that were smaller in previous slides become bigger here. The most prominent topics clearly center around practical matters for a safe and healthy life. And it's not just food and water, but also supplies, housing, energy, education, and opportunities. Comments restated the need for solutions, including education and government involvement. Again, concerns about racial issues and whiteness were discussed. And what's interesting is that the community level resilience themes touch on everyone's personal needs. Next slide. A few other ideas about community level resilience have some unique entries. You reflected on winter coming up against climate change. You mentioned bylaws as an example of a specific approach for managing resilience. There continue to be comments about race and class and new attention to the possibility of ecological refugees. And most of all, the word focus speaks to making decisions with real implications and getting things done. Next slide. Finally, here are quotes that identify the direction we need to go in and the things we need to focus on. They reflect tension between vulnerability and creating stability. They discuss needs specific to Winnipeg. And I would say a major highlight of these quotes is that resilience is a multi-step process. And now I'm going to hand it back to Emily.
Thanks, Allie. Thanks, Glenn. So it's kind of a great segue into our next presentation. I would like to welcome Jeff Siekowski, Director of Community Resilience with the All One Sky Foundation. All of you have shared your definitions of climate resiliency in the pre-webinar survey, and now I think Jeff is going to be able to kind of build on that and define some of those key concepts, and also share some local climate trends and background information about the climate adaptation process. So I'll pass it off to Jeff, and I'm going to stop sharing my presentation so he can share his presentation with you.
Okay, thanks, Emily. I assume that's working for everyone. You can see my screen, great. Hi everyone, so my name is Jeff Siekowski. I'm the Director of Climate and Community Resilience at All One Sky Foundation. And as Emily said, I'll talk to you guys a little bit about some examples of what climate adaptation and resilience is and what that planning process looks like. And so my background is I've been doing community climate adaptation planning for about the last 12 years. I've worked mostly on with municipalities. I've worked with about 40 different municipalities in BC and Alberta, and also worked with a variety of other organizations and groups that are interested in understanding climate change impacts and adapting to them. And so just a little bit about our organization. So we are a charitable, not-for-profit organization. We aren't really based anywhere. We're sort of based in Western Canada, in BC, in Alberta. And as I said, we work in, I guess, 3 different fields, really. The field I work in primarily is climate adaptation and resilience planning, but we also do work around energy poverty, so helping vulnerable populations deal with energy issues. And that's kind of related to equity and justice around the climate transition. And we also have an economist on staff, and we do work in looking at economic impacts of climate change and the costs of actions. So that's me, and that's our organization. And so before I launch into talking about climate adaptation and resilience planning, what that means, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with a few concepts. So the first one, of course, is about the difference between mitigation and adaptation, and I'm sure everyone's probably aware of this, but just want to make sure we're all clear. So that in the middle of your screen here, you can see there's a hypothetical community or this is society in general that releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and those gases cause the climate change and global warming. And so how we can deal with that in 2 different ways, really. Is the first one is you can do what we call climate mitigation, so you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And on the flip side is responding to the actual changes in the climate, so the actual negative effects or positive effects that might come from the fact that the weather's different, the temperature and precipitation is different. So that's climate adaptation. That's primarily what we're talking about. And then there's also this notion of resilience, which I think looks like someone in the pre-webinar survey nailed the definition. But resilience is really about the ability of a community or an organization to withstand, respond to, adapt more readily to all sorts of shocks and stresses. And so the way I view resilience, the way a lot of people view resilience now, is it's sort of, in a lot of ways, it encompasses climate adaptation and mitigation, but it's much broader, and it takes into account, looking at all sorts of resilience to all sorts of shocks, including global pandemics, and ensuring everyone has appropriate housing and quality of life, and so it's a bit of a broader term, and I'll apologize in advance that I'll probably use adaptation and resilience interchangeably, but I'm definitely focused on the sort of right side of your screen there, looking at actions to reduce negative impacts. So that's what we're talking about. The other term that's important to understand is about risk, so climate risk. So this figure is showing the different components of climate risk. So on the left-hand side, you start with these sort of climate hazards, and there's typically, when we think about climate risk, a lot of people think automatically about the extreme events, right? Extreme rainfall events or floods or fires, storms. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is just this gradual change in temperature, and precipitation, which can affect water quality and water availability and ecosystems. So there's the climate hazards, and then you as a community or organization will be exposed, either exposed or not exposed to different types of hazards, right? So obviously if you're in the floodplain, you're exposed to flooding. And if you're not, then you're probably not exposed to that. So exposure is a key component of risk. And then the other part of it is about your vulnerability. So vulnerability really has two aspects. It's about how sensitive or susceptible you are to different types of impacts and your ability to respond to them. So as an example, if you're in a community that's susceptible to wildfire, then, or sorry, that you're exposed to wildfire, then you're probably going to be less vulnerable if you have, you know, a volunteer fire department team and water availability, and you thin the forest around your community, then you're going to be less sensitive, and you're going to have a greater ability to adapt to a potential wildfire. So just some basic concepts there about adaptation, mitigation, climate risk. I do want to move on now and talk about the planning process, really. And if any of you have been involved in any sort of climate adaptation and resilience planning process, the first thing you're going to notice is that there's dozens, hundreds of different guides out there that tell you how to do climate adaptation and resilience planning, especially if you're a municipality. And so when I started in this field about 12 years ago, there was really only one making guidebook that was out there, and we followed that guidebook. And then since then, there's been literally dozens, I want to say maybe close to 100 different guidebooks out there about how to do this. And so you can see the one in the middle here, this Climate Resilience Express at the bottom is the one that we've actually developed our own, which is really focused on a simple process designed more for smaller rural communities, but it's applicable to really any community. So before I talk more about the process, we're going to do a few polls, and I wanted to do a test poll first just to make sure everyone's awake and also everyone's able to use the poll. So you should see a poll pop up on your screen, and the first question here is about how many people are optimistic that the NHL season is going to resume and that maybe the Winnipeg Jets will win the Stanley Cup. And so you should be able to just click yes or no on your screen. So is that working for people? Yeah, I think Emily I think we can probably close this out and show the results. Oh, most people are pessimistic that it's not going to happen. Okay, that's unfortunate. I think I'm an optimist. I believe that it's going to happen this year. So I guess the real question I actually wanted to ask you was about how many of you represent a community or an organization that's either completed or started a climate adaptation and resilience planning process. So again, you should see a poll pop up, and I'm just trying to get a sense of where everyone's at. So I'll give you a few more seconds to finish that, and we can probably close that poll out, Emily, I think. And you should see some results pop up at some point. Well, there you go. So it looks like about, yeah, 39% yes, 42% no, and then some folks are unsure. Okay, so about 50-50 split, essentially. So good to know. Okay. So the process that we recommend and the approach that I've used with numerous communities and other organizations is a really simple 4-step process to going from essentially knowing nothing to having a climate adaptation plan and implementing it. And as I said, this is based on the Climate Resilience Express guidebook that we've developed, which you can find online. So the first step here is about the scope of the process and defining the context. And I don't have time to go into all of these scope issues in detail, but I just want to touch on a few of them. So if you're looking at the climate of the future, the first thing you need to figure out is, well, I guess the time horizon. So how far in the future do you want to look when you're thinking about climate change impacts and adaptation? And typically for a community or any organization, really, we're typically looking at the 2050s because it seems like a logical planning time horizon. The 2080s is a bit farther out, or getting into the end of the century is just a bit too far away. So we typically look at like a 20 to 30 year time horizon, and there's readily available climate projections for the 2050s. So it's typically what we use. You also want to look at the geographic scope. So again, if you're a municipality, we're typically defining like the geographic boundaries of your municipality. And the reason we do that is because if you don't do that, then you could end up looking at the impacts of climate change on avocados in Peru and how that might affect Winnipeg. And I think there's just a need to kind of keep the scope manageable in a process. You also want to decide the types of stakeholders you're going to engage and how you're going to engage them, and the types of processes you'll use to engage with different people within your community and external to your community. I'll just dive in a little bit deeper into a couple of scope issues. So the first one is about the organizational scope of the process. And so there's really, I think there's three different ways you can, and really you can apply the planning process to any scope you want, right? So on the left-hand side here, you can really apply this process to a specific building or a facility or a site, and you can look at the impacts of climate change on that building or facility or site, and how you want to be more resilient or adapted at that site. You can also expand that to your corporation. So in the municipal context, you can look at your assets, your services, your infrastructure, your operations, and how the climate might affect those, and what you can do to be more adaptive. And then the scope that we typically use with municipalities we work with is sort of this community-wide idea. So it's the notion that you're looking at your corporate services and operations, but you're also looking more broadly at your community and your economy and the ecosystem around your community and health and well-being of your residents. And so it's a bit of a broader scope. So again, you can make that decision on your own. So the next thing you need to do is compile some climate trends and projections. And you guys are obviously really lucky there in Manitoba. You have the Prairie Climate Center that's developed this climate atlas, and it's an outstanding resource. Really, you can really click on any place you want in Manitoba, and you can get a variety of information about a variety of climate trends and climate changes. And so I'm not going to go into detail about the trends and projections for Manitoba or for Winnipeg, but just show you one example of what one of those figures looks like. So you can see here I picked the location. It says Manitoba. I just clicked on all of Manitoba. The variable I picked was mean annual temperature, so just average temperature, or sorry, it's actually mean summer temperature. And then I've chosen this time series, and so it's literally a couple clicks of the button, and you can see that historically across Winnipeg, the average summer temperature is about 14 degrees Celsius. When you get into the 2050s, it goes up to about 17 degrees, and then when you get towards the end of the century, it's about 20 degrees Celsius. So but what's projected is about a 6 degrees Celsius increase in summer temperature by the 2080s. And as I said, you can change this variable. You can look at hot days, cold days, growing season, precipitation in different seasons. It's really unlimited what you can look at. But in general, the projections for Manitoba and for most of Canada is for increasing temperatures across all seasons, but particularly hotter, drier summers and warmer and wetter winters, and more extreme precipitation and more extreme events in general. And that translates into things like longer growing season and just frost season as well. So that's a few aspects of the scope that I wanted to touch on. I'll move on now to the second part of the process, which is about assessing risks. And so this phase is getting you to a place where you have a list of priority climate risks for your community or for your organization. And typically how we present that is in this, which is a risk matrix. So I assume this looks familiar to some people on the call here. A risk matrix is essentially a two-dimensional scale which shows consequence on one side and likelihood on the other. And so the whole purpose of having a matrix like this is so you can figure out which of your climate risks for your community or for your organization belong in that red zone. So that's the high consequence, high likelihood events, and those are the things you want to be addressing in a climate adaptation or resilience plan. And we typically do this through a workshop type process, and my experience working with municipalities is if you have the correct people in the room that have knowledge of the community and the issues that you faced in the past and are managing infrastructure and people and the environment, you can get those people in a room and get agreement on what the consequence and likelihood levels are of different risk scenarios. And I think Dwayne from Selkirk will be talking about some of the work they did, which I assume they used a similar process. We typically use a voting software. So this is an example of, this is a real example of, we did some work with an energy company and looked at, okay, well, how significant is a severe wind event on your infrastructure? And you can see that people vote and they say it's, you know, between minor and major. And then typically what happens is you get somebody in the room who's got more experience or has, you know, understands your infrastructure better, and you have a discussion, and then you end up getting consensus on what the actual consequence is. And it's a very effective and also a really fun way to do a climate risk assessment. And the end result looks something like this. This is, of course, just a hypothetical example of how that risk matrix would be populated. So again, you get the goal is to figure out which climate risks are most significant for your community. And you also may want to do the same thing for benefits or opportunities. Again, this is hypothetical, but these are typical benefits or opportunities identified by communities across Canada, across the prairies that we've worked with. So things like longer growing seasons, longer construction seasons, more summer tourism, recreation, reduced fuel, heating costs and demand. So it's something that typically isn't done in a climate adaptation planning process, but it's an aspect that we incorporate, and that's really, I think, a best practice to not just focus on the negative, but also think about some of the opportunities and how you can take advantage of them. I won't go into this in a significant amount of detail, but I just want to say that what I just presented to you was more of a qualitative risk assessment process that we would do through essentially a one workshop or two workshops. And this is an example of a quantitative process that we employed with the city of Edmonton. And so we looked at 15 different climate hazards and how those hazards were affecting all of the assets and services across the city of Edmonton. And we actually quantified the cost and the impact of different types of events like windstorms, hailstorms, and how those would cause direct damage to people, the natural environment, cultural, social cultural issues, economic costs, and then you can actually come up with a total number. Oops, how'd that happen? Yeah, you can actually come up with economic, essentially a cost of what each of these events is going to cost you in the future. So that's it's quite a resource intensive and expensive process, but it is possible to do this in a quantitative way. I think we have another poll here for you. So I didn't go into a lot of detail about climate projections and impacts, but I just wanted to get people's impression of what they see as some of the most significant climate change risks facing Manitoba. And I believe you're forced to pick only one of these, and I'm sure there's other impacts or risks that you think may be relevant, but you're going to be forced to pick one of these, which one you think is the most significant. So I think, Emily, we're getting a bunch of responses in. Okay, we can probably, I assume everyone's got that in, so one more. Okay, I'll have a drink of coffee then. Okay. So we should see some results. All right. So it looks like most people are 36% of you, 13 of you are on the drought water availability as one of the biggest issues facing Manitoba, flooding, ecosystem shifts. Surprisingly, no one picked wildfires. I thought there'd be, I guess maybe fires are more of an issue in the north. I'm not really sure. And nobody thinks climate change is a hoax, so that's a good indicator. Okay, I'm gonna move on now. I'm trying to move this thing. Yeah. Okay, so I talked about defining the context, risk assessment, and then the next aspect is about action planning. So as I said, the reason you produce a risk matrix or you go through a risk assessment process is to prioritize the risks to your community or organization. And so phase 3, looking at action planning, is really trying to address the most significant risks that face your community. And typically when people think about climate adaptation action, they tend to focus on infrastructure. So I think there's this tendency to think that, oh, climate change is happening, there's these impacts, we need to build new infrastructure or upgrade our infrastructure. And I think that's one aspect of it for sure, but there's also a huge variety of other actions that you can do as a community or organization, looking at, if you don't have enough information about the risk or about how to adapt, you can do some research, you can update your policies, plans, bylaws, regulations, standards. Typically, I think in general, you want to be thinking about how does climate change affect all of your policies, all of your bylaws, all of your plans that are sort of strategic in nature and have some maybe influenced by the climate in some way. You also want to think about your operations and your maintenance. I remember I worked with a municipality in BC several years ago, and one of the big aha moments that they had was that they need to increase the frequency of which they clean out their culverts, and it was like really a maintenance schedule thing that was the big action for them, and so sometimes it's as simple as that. I talked about infrastructure, so that's like flood protection, permeable surfaces, wetland restoration, looking at how your types of asphalt mixes you use, and there's all sorts of infrastructure solutions. You could do some awareness and education. So if you feel like your residents in your community or in your organization don't understand the issues or don't understand why you need to do certain things, then you could do an awareness or education campaign and help your staff or residents or vulnerable populations understand the changes and the impacts. I have diversification there, so really thinking about your economy. So if you're a tourism-based economy or a agriculture-based economy, you might want to diversify the types of products that are important to your community, or if you're a business, then you might want to think about the products you offer and change those. Emergency management, so that's responding to specific the sort of climate hazards. So of course that's things like creating emergency management plans, emergency response plans, and maybe updating some notification and alert systems. And then also human resourcing, training, capacity building. So that could be things like creating a new committee or a task force, or hiring people to help implement some of the actions within your plan. So that's sort of just a big summary of the types of actions that you could do. And I actually, sorry, Dwayne, I actually pinched this from the Selkirk Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, because once you have a big list of all the types of actions you could do, there's really a need to screen and prioritize them in some way, because clearly we don't all have unlimited resources, right? So you need to figure out, well, which of these actions are going to be most effective, affordable, feasible, which ones are acceptable to residents and council, whether they're equitable or not, and how flexible they are in the future. So you can go through a sort of a qualitative process to score these and figure out which actions are going to be best for your community or organization. And as with the risk assessment, there's also an option to do this in a quantitative way, right? Using a cost benefit analysis or some sort of quantitative approach, and you can actually quantify the costs and benefits of different potential actions, and that's something we've done as well. So that's the action planning side, and I believe I have a few more minutes left. Emily, I don't know what the time is, but if I have a few minutes, I can talk about a couple of couple minutes, maybe? Okay, so I did have a bunch of examples in here, but I thought I would just focus on the work. We've been working with the City of Edmonton for probably 5 or 6 years now, and they produced their Climate Resilient Edmonton Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan in 2018, and they've been doing several things to implement it over the last few years, and I think they kind of touch on some of the examples I was showing about climate resilience action. So this is their Change Habits for Climate sort of. It's basically an education and awareness campaign, and it's got aspects of like letting residents know how they can upgrade their homes to be more climate resilient, change their buildings, how businesses can adapt. They've also got this capacity building program. It's a climate adaptation ambassador program. So working with residents and neighborhoods and basically helping them understand local climate change issues, and then they actually get a certification and they become like essentially a neighborhood ambassador. Helping other people in their community understand climate change issues and impacts. We also just recently completed a tool, a climate resilient home. And actually, I'm just realizing now, I think that's the wrong link at the top. It should be climate resilient home, not climate resilience home, but this is essentially an online tool that allows you to see all the different aspects of your home or a building and figure out how to adapt your building or your house to be more climate resilient or adaptive. And we also did some research projects with the city, again looking at how do we better manage invasive species and pests, how do we manage urban forests, and how do we better deal with water security and demand management issues. And lastly, I just wanted to touch quickly on the flood prevention side. So those were really education and awareness stuff and capacity building, but there is of course a lot of infrastructure stuff as well. And so Edmonton's done both a stormwater management plan and a source water protection plan, and thinking about how climate change is going to affect those things. And they've come out with some programs for residents, so home inspection programs and backwater valve subsidy programs. And then this is sort of an image showing their infrastructure plan, which is based on looking at future climate projections, and it's a 20-year, $1.6 billion plan to upgrade their infrastructure to deal with projected changes in extreme rainfall events in Edmonton. So I believe that's it for me. And I think I'm going to pass it back to Emily, and we will have some questions afterwards, I believe.
Yeah, we're going to have all of the presentations, and then we'll have a Q&A after. But just a reminder, if you have questions as they come up, feel free to write them in the chat box here, because, you know, they quickly go out of your head sometimes if you leave it. So feel free to write those questions anytime. I'm just going to pass it off to Dwayne Nickel, Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Selkirk, and he's going to be sharing some highlights from the city's development of a climate change adaptation strategy. So, Dwayne. Dwayne, you're just muted right now, so I think I've unmuted you now.
Yep, sure have.
Sorry about that.
No, all good. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, let's get the slide going here. All right, we will just jump right into it. So I just want to give you a little bit of context about the city of Selkirk. For those who don't know, we were founded in 1882. And so Winnipeg is located 30 kilometers south of us. We have a population of about 10,000 people, but we're an urban hub. So we serve the commercial, recreation, and health services for a region of about 35,000 people. We're a relatively old community with our origins tied to the Lord Selkirk settlers. And between 82 and 2006, we were experiencing a period of decline with shrinking population and evaporating tax base. In 2006, we turned a bit of a corner, started growing again, and in fact, not only were we growing, but our rate of growth is increasing. So in fact, last year we were named by Maclean's as one of Canada's top 100 fastest growing communities. We've got a small organization, about 65 permanent staff, keeping everything together. So to summarize, we have old infrastructure that, due to a lack of resources, has been under-maintained for a number of decades. And we have now a growing population, putting even further strain on our systems. So most people would say that's a problem, but in the context of climate change, it's a huge opportunity. It means in the next 20 years, we'll be replacing tens of millions of dollars in facilities, pipes, building systems, fleet, etc. So our mission, if we choose to accept it, is to make sure that every dollar is spent on infrastructure that reduces our carbon footprint and readies us for the future climate. So the context here for us is that we've taken some action in climate change, focusing on GHG reduction, so the mitigation side of things. In 2016, we adopted a plan, not the world's greatest plan, but at least it got it started, and it also gave us a corporate target. So our commitment is approved by council to reduce our GHG emissions 20% below our 2011 levels for municipal operations within 10 years. So in terms of that action, we have Selkirk Transit, and now we are piloting a hybrid vehicle with the intention of converting the entire fleet to low to no carbon vehicles. We are reducing our taking a look at our fleet and reducing the size of the fleet, as well as looking to electrify. This is our new fire hall that we just built. It has 90% heated with non-natural gas heating, and our new wastewater treatment plant will use no fossil fuels whatsoever. We're converting old systems, so this is our water treatment plant going to a geothermal system using our existing raw water wells, and looking to this at one point was Manitoba's largest rooftop solar installation. So taking quite a bit of action there. So we had some background in climate change. We then participated in the FCM's Climate and Asset Management Network. That was in 2018. And so out of the 19 communities that were involved, Selkirk was the smallest and the only one in Manitoba selected as a participant. We used that funding and partnered with the Prairie Climate Center to develop our climate change adaptation strategy. So strategy is really important because it documents intention. The life cycle of a strategy extends beyond the life of any one council. Gives us broad policy objectives and gives administration political license to operate, and provides ongoing and consistent direction to the organization. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about now is really aligned to what Jeff had talked about, but there's a bit of a spin that we sort of put on it. We actually asked the Prairie Climate Center to give us data that's obviously focused on Selkirk, so that locality, but we also wanted to present it season by season so that we could take a look at it from a service by service perspective. This allowed us to bring staff in from all levels of the organization, so right down to the front line up to the CAO. So we think in seasons, we only have 65 people, so the same people that are putting the ice in the arena are the people that are cutting the grass in the summertime. So this allowed us to engage the entire organization. So we used a modified framework. We looked, there's lots of models, as has been said. We largely borrowed from the ICLEI BARC model framework to go through the work here. And so we created our working group and involved the Prairie Climate Center. And so we had them come out, talk about locally relevant climate change information, and delivered in a way that our staff could really conceptualize the impact on our operations and see how it impacted their day-to-day work. We did use the Climate Atlas. It's a very strong tool. And then we looked at all of those impacts season to season, service by service. So as an example, four key outcomes that we identified were more frequent and intense heat waves, warmer winters with increased precipitation, more intense rainstorms causing flooding, as well as shoulder season cold snaps. So we took a look at those potential impacts, and we had the staff identify, again, season by season, service area by service area, what were the potential consequences of those, the impacts and the consequences of those impacts, and had them identify and document those. So as an example, under the frequency and intensity of heat waves, the team identified increased vulnerability of our population to health issues. We then saw city workers were going to experience health problems due to physical heat stress. We're going to have greater water demands and increased stress of our air conditioning in terms of our facility systems. So then we assess the climate, assess the risk of those impacts, and using a very similar model as has been talked about already. This allowed us to prioritize and rank the potential risks, and allowed us to focus on the extremely high and high risks for us. We then asked the team to take those risks and step away and identify 3 items for each of the risks that they could see that we could use to adapt our programming and our services. So then we started developing the adaptation plan. So as we've talked, has been shared, we put each of those ideas through an evaluation process. So we come back as a group, shared our 3 different ideas, and then through synergy, new ideas come forward. We put all of those ideas through the criteria we talked about here to rank, and then we also had sort of a criteria to identify what was actually implementable. So we looked at the operating costs, looked at the upfront costs, as well as a time frame for implementation. So once we had all that information, we were able to identify the action items that we felt were the best fit for our community and delivered the most impactful way, and something we could actually put into place. So this made sure that we contemplated all of the impacts across the organization, and so we took all those things and then we clustered them and ran them through our corporate strategic plan, because one of the things we identified early on was we needed to ensure that this was integrated into our existing business system, so we could actually do them, and that we would get council and broad community support for them. So what the result of that is what we call our tactics. And so you can see here each of the related adaptation actions were clustered. We linked them to the corporate strategic plan. So we identified the specific tactic, and these are projects that we can actually identify, do a case study for, and plug into our budget processes. And so I'm just going to go through them really quickly here. There's a bit of a timeline. So the first off is establishing our street tree program that has started as a policy and procedures to implement. One of the things that come out of this, as well as through our integration to our corporate plan, was making sure that we were focusing on prioritizing things that were important within the climate change adaptation context, but also important to the broader community. So climate change mitigation was also important, and so you'll see some of these things transition into supporting our mitigation work as well. So establishing that street tree program and then implementing the program, we've established a tree inventory and started collecting to understand better the stock that we have and the condition and what needs to be done to make sure that they're resilient. And then establishing an urban forest program. So how do we develop and manage these trees to ensure that they're delivering maximum ecological services for the community? Establishing an aquifer monitoring program. We know that precipitation is going to change, so we're 100% on groundwater. So what does that mean for us in terms of preparedness and whether we can provide water to our citizens? Updating our water master plan using a climate change projection lens, so making sure that our systems have the capacity to serve. Creating a policy and procedure, a protocol for responding to water shortage events, something that is likely a potential problem that we're going to have, and so making sure we have sort of the capacity to respond to that effectively. We're doing a recreation facilities study right now, and so while we don't provide heat and cold respite services today, it's likely that we're going to need to provide that in the future. So we want to make sure that whatever new facility we build has the capacity to provide those services. Developing a protocol for our staff so they can we can better manage and deliver our services in extreme weather events. Risk policy to give or integrate, amend our asset management risk policy so that we're giving priority to water and wastewater projects that are separating our combined systems, so that allows us to be better adapted and resilient to storm events. Conducting a land drainage study to identify improvement areas, and then implementing the study. So each of these tactics then, this is our sort of broader business planning process, we put it onto our multi-year tactical plan, and this ensures that this strategy document doesn't sit on a shelf somewhere, but it actually works into how we deliver and manage systems, and how we actually budget. Because if I can't budget it, I can't do it. So this is make sure that there's a direct link between the idea and the concept and the strategy and the day-to-day action that happens. So as I said, we've started our tree inventory. We expect to be finished this year, a year ahead actually. We have integrated climate change considerations into our asset management risk asset management risk management policy, and we're looking at other options or other tools within the asset management field to integrate our adaptation strategy. We really think that asset management is the #1 tool, so just a legislative framework or map for our system here, because this is about not just capital and procurement, but also about the operation and maintenance, how we operate and maintain our infrastructure that delivers services. So this is a way that we can make climate change adaptation routine. And the benefit as well of having a plan is that it forces the whole organization to think about climate change or resiliency as we do the other work that may not have been initially planned. So recently we just purchased 326 acres that really represents the next 25 to 50 years of development for the city. And we're developing a concept plan on how that land will be used. Climate change adaptation will be a lens that will be baked right into that concept plan to make sure that we're developing our community in a way that's going to be more resilient. So in terms of final thoughts, just a couple here. Climate change is not a technical problem. We know the solutions. It's a cultural problem. It's an organizational problem. It's how do you get the organization to have the capacity, to have the agency to actually respond and take the actions that we know that they need to take. Make climate action boring, make it routine. Routine gets done. Again, if you depend on a champion within the organization to sort of flag every time something might be a climate change problem, whether it's resiliency or mitigation, you're not going to be as effective as if you change the rules of the game, the business case procedures, all the processes that you create. That you depend upon to make forward to put forward decisions, you need to change those so that it's just routine, right? So we're optimizing the decision-making processes to get a more resilient result every time. Thinking and planning are great so long as they don't interfere with the doing. Listen, our climate knowledge is imperfect and it's going to be for some time. It's going to evolve. So look at adaptive systems. Don't focus on having a perfect plan because it'll never be perfect. You're going to have to update this over time. But get started, right? Take the initial steps and start moving in the right direction. And then dream big, start small, and take ground as you can. There's a lot of naysayers, a lot of people that focus on price rather than long-term cost. But if you take a more methodical approach, you'll be able to move the ball forward. We have a climate adaptation page where we have the actual document you can download, as well as a 8-minute micro documentary co-starring Catherine McKenna. So that presents it in a way more eloquent way than what I'm presenting now. And that is it. My time is past expired.
Thanks, Dwayne. Okay, it's awesome you can share that local example with us. I'm going to be passing it off to our next speakers who are from the city of Winnipeg. And we have Lindsay Moreau, manager of the Office of Sustainability, Martha Barwinski, City Forester, and Michelle Patecow, Senior Wastewater Planning Engineer, who are joining us. We also have some additional city staff who have joined us as well. And so during the Q&A, they'll be able to answer questions as needed. And I think Lindsay will let you know about who has joined us, which additional people have joined us from the city as well. And I'm just going to get Lindsay and Martha Michelle's presentation up here, and then I'll pass it off to them. Just give me 1 second. Okay, off to you, Lindsay.
Hey, thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to just begin by touching on some of the background of Winnipeg's actions on climate change and the history and background. So Winnipeg joined the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection back in 1998. which committed us to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. More recently in our Winnipeg, the public service was directed to develop a climate action plan, and the Office of Sustainability led these efforts back a couple of years ago, leading to Council's approval of the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan in September of 2018. So that climate plan developed and engaged a lot of our community members. About 5,000 people participated in that. There was a lot of enthusiasm from the community, and that helped us deliver the vision statement that you're seeing on the slide here. So the Climate Action Plan, just very briefly, includes a full inventory of where our emissions come from. So as you can see on the right, Winnipeg's emissions, about half of them come from transportation sector. The second largest source of our emissions are from the building sector, building natural gas at about 35%. And the third largest sources of emission come from waste disposal at about 15%. So the Climate Action Plan also included greenhouse gas reduction targets of 20% reduction in emissions by 2030 and an 80% reduction in emissions by 2050. The plan includes 7 different strategic opportunities for the city to focus on, beginning with leadership and leading by example, as well as the importance of collaborating with community and community leadership on climate action. And then a number of actions, there's about 140 actions in the plan related to the transportation, land use, buildings, waste sectors. But of course, today we're here to focus on the 7th strategic opportunity of climate resiliency and adaptation. So, during our consultation, we really heard from participants on the important connections between mitigation and adaptation efforts and how this can help us build a more resilient community. So I think we all recognized how it's important that Winnipeg become a climate resilient city. We want to be a city which our institutions, our businesses, our communities, our individuals are all able to adapt to survive, to thrive in response to a climate disruption. So in today's presentation, you'll hear about some examples of the work going on in our public works and our water and waste department. But all of that said, opportunities for additional climate adaptation really need to be considered in a formal adaptation strategy. So you've heard already today from our previous presenters on some of the processes involved in that. But just very briefly, we need to review the climate science for Winnipeg specifically, inventory our assets and operations, look at the risk and vulnerability of those, and then develop strategies that are grouped generally around physical or structural strategies, program strategies, and governance strategies related to, for example, changing design guidelines or budget processes or incorporating climate adaptation into planning processes. So, I think you've heard enough about that today. So just going right into some other components of our climate plan, we do highlight some of the climate science data from the Prairie Climate Center, which, we've heard already is a really important resource and we're really lucky to have based here out of the University of Winnipeg. So projections for Winnipeg include an increased precipitation levels in the spring, increased frequency of extreme weather events. So I think all of us don't have to reach very far back in our memories to recall, summer heat warnings followed by record-breaking rainfall, leading to the closure of our Red River floodway last fall for the first time in history, followed by devastating snowstorm events, which cost the city millions in recovery costs. We can also expect to see hotter summers. So historically, Winnipeg may have experienced heat waves that last 3 or 4 days. So by mid-century, we can expect that if carbon emissions continue on the path they are now, we can expect that those heat waves might last 7 or 8 days. So, that of course has other impacts to our communities. Nights above 20 degrees Celsius, we're seeing much more of those. And so for people who don't have the means to offset the heat of these warm nights, that can really lead to quality of life issues. So communities across the world and certainly in Winnipeg as well are facing serious threats related to public health, infrastructure costs that are rising, the viability of our economy, and social equity associated with climate change. So just to use one example, heat waves can have a really devastating effect on the health of our communities. We've seen this in examples from European cities and cities in North America as well. And the World Health Organization, the Public Health Agency of Canada, they've all identified that extreme heat and high temperatures are linked to premature death, heat stroke, aggravation of heart and respiratory diseases. So our vulnerable populations, especially seniors, children, or those with limited economic means, are a particular risk of heat-related morbidity and mortality. So recognizing, there's increased urgency associated with climate change action at the municipal level, in January 2020, Council received its first year update on progress in implementing the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan. So you'll recall that we just approved our first community plan in 2018. So this is a first year, how have we done in implementing it? So this update report, Emily, if you can advance the slide. This update report is available on the city's website if anyone wants to review the details of it. But I just wanted to highlight some of the climate adaptation or resiliency related measures that are discussed in that report. These actions include things like the city's investment in updated flood mapping, a grant of $100,000 to help restore in partnership with the Red River Basin Commission, restoration of the Netley-Lebo Marsh. The announcement around the 1 million tree challenge, which aims to plant 1 million trees before Winnipeg's population reaches 1 million people. As well as things like educational workshops provided to staff internally around climate adaptation. And then the initiation of the development of a long-term vision and strategy for both Winnipeg's urban forest as well as urban parks. And then finally, the report certainly included strong recommendations for increased resources to implement our plan and the need for staff, dedicated staff to really focus on developing the climate resiliency and adaptation strategy and the actions within that. So, currently in the 2020-2021 year, we're working on other initiatives as well, as much as we can. We do have quite a small staff at the Office of Sustainability, but we do have great people working in all our departments that have been really helpful. So some of the work that we're doing currently include looking at how we heat map that we've developed with our data scientists, and how we can show relationships between surface temperature in different neighborhoods and the built environment, as well as natural features such as trees and rivers and streams. We also work with our Food Policy Council and our Office of Emergency Measures, which provides amenities such as cooling centers during extreme heat. So, I won't go into all of those details. We don't have time today, but thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, Manitoba Eco-Network. And now I'll just turn it over to Martha Barwinski, City Forester.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. So you can forward on to the next slide. Thanks. I'm Martha Barwinski. I'm the City Forester. I've been with the city for over 15 years. I've been working in urban forestry and arboriculture for over 20 years, and starting with research, teaching, and community, working for community organizations before I came into the city, and also working as a private arborist as well. So I wanted to talk with you today about climate resiliency in our urban forest, and it's interesting with talking about climate change and mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency. The urban forest has been shown to help mitigate impacts of climate change, but it's interesting that climate change is also impacting the urban forest itself. So we're looking at both sides here. 80% of Canadians actually live in urban areas. We have discovered, and we've known that for a few years now. The World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization with the United Nations have recognized the importance of urban forests by providing, I guess, the importance of urban forests in our urban setting by providing ecosystem services that benefit the well-being of communities. And so these ecosystem services or these benefits help reduce the impacts of climate change, and they also help reduce the risks that climate change causes, or the risks of climate change for human health as well. So what are those kinds of things? So there's lots of evidence, lots of research that shows that urban forests reduce the urban heat island effect. They reduce stormwater runoff. They also capture or sequester carbon. They improve our air quality. They reduce emissions. They also reduce energy costs, and even more at the community street level, if you will. They provide shading and cooling during our hot summer months, which improve the quality of life of residents at the street level. And research is now showing too that there's increased benefits for having trees in your neighborhood, whereby there's a better sense of place. There's also a healthier community. There's a healthier social network, and there's also improved cardiovascular health. And trees will also help with your mental well-being as well. You can go to the next slide. So what do we have in Winnipeg? This is a classic shot of an older neighborhood in Winnipeg with our elm canopy. Winnipeg is home to the largest American elm population in all of North America. We basically are internationally renowned for our American elm population, currently at about 225,000 American elms. But we also know that we have a very low diversity of tree species in our urban environment, in our urban forest. So what have we been doing in Winnipeg? Within the past 5 years, we have conducted multiple inventories of our tree asset. So we've completed and provided access to, through open data portal on the City of Winnipeg website, to our public tree inventory. So we've completed a complete inventory of our trees on boulevards and in parks. And we've also completed an inventory of all elm trees on all properties in the City of Winnipeg, and all ash trees on all properties in the City of Winnipeg. And the rationale for that is so that we know we need to know what we're managing in order to manage it. And we also know that there's additional risks, not just to climate change, but also to invasive pests. And so we need to have a snapshot and information about what inventory we have, and how we're actually going to manage it through all of these different challenges. We also are in the process, as Lindsay mentioned, to create an urban forest strategy for the City of Winnipeg. And this strategy is a public engagement supported strategy that will look at how we're going to be managing our urban forest over the next 20 years. So it's really providing us with a strategic direction and framework for managing the urban forest, including key items, management items such as tree planting, reforestation, invasive pest management, maintenance such as pruning, and also tree protection and preservation. And the tree protection and preservation also aligns with the city's infill development strategy that is being created. And through the public engagement on that strategy, it was identified that tree protection and preservation was actually one of the top 10 concerns with development, particularly with infill development. So we intend to address that through our urban forest strategy. Now, as we've been working towards developing this urban forest strategy, we've also worked with the University of Winnipeg to conduct an iTree analysis of a sample set of our urban forest. And iTree is actually a tool that was created by, an online tool that was created by the USDA Forest Service many years ago to help that would quantify the benefits and values of trees in communities. And so it provides an analysis of you know, how much carbon is sequestered, how much pollution is removed from the air due to the canopy, how much stormwater runoff is impacted or reduced as a result of having that canopy. Also assessed value of that canopy, which is called a structural value, and other things. So those are the kinds of things that we've actually conducted that analysis, and we have the information, and now that's being filtered out now and evaluated, and that will be incorporated into our urban forest strategy. And the rationale for using those tools is also to identify, help you make decisions on what you need to change or what you need to improve. And it also helps us advocate for additional funding or additional management for the urban forest. What we do know from that preliminary assessment of the iTree analysis is that our canopy cover in Winnipeg is approximately 23.6%. And nationally, on average, a standard that's been put out there is 25% canopy cover. So we're actually doing fairly well. However, we do know that we are losing canopy due to significant weather events and also invasive pests. And of course, our October storm was a good example of a significant weather event where approximately 30,000 of our public trees were impacted. And with the invasive pests, of course, next slide, please, we look at diversity. And so one of our biggest challenges in Winnipeg is that we do have a low diversity of tree species in our urban forest, and which now places us at high risk of high impacts or losses due to invasive pests. So we've been managing Dutch elm disease for 45 years now. Even before Dutch elm disease was found in Winnipeg, plans were already put in place to manage the pest, and it's an integrated pest management program looking at the host and the vector and the pathogen. And so we're integrating all of those parts of that disease in our management program. And we've been the most successful city in all of North America with preserving our elm canopy. And even through our iTree analysis, we've discovered even more that how important American elm is actually for sequestering carbon and improving our air quality in the city of Winnipeg. But we can't just rely on elm. We need to have a more diverse urban forest to be able to withstand the risks or the impacts associated with various invasive species. And these invasive species are often very species specific. So when we've got Dutch elm disease, our elms are at high risk of being lost. And now we have emerald ash borer in Winnipeg, and we also have cottony ash psyllid in Winnipeg. And when we look at our ash population based on our inventories, we actually have more ash trees in the city of Winnipeg than elms. And the majority of those ash occur on private properties. So we see that there's a significant risk of losing a lot of our trees on private properties and in our natural areas. We estimate through that iTree analysis, we have over 3 million trees in the city of Winnipeg, but only 300,000 of those actually occur on boulevards and in parks. So a good chunk of our urban forest does sit on private properties and in natural areas. So in order to manage Dutch elm disease, we've been working on this integrated pest management program. We continue to do that. With emerald ash borer, we have identified a plan to manage emerald ash borer, but we still really don't have a fully committed program to manage emerald ash borer. So we continue to work on that. We continue to identify what needs to be done to not necessarily manage the pest, but manage the mortality that will come and the loss of ash trees that will come as the pest population increases. Next slide, please. So with these losses, of course, we're also looking at reforestation efforts, and we can't do this alone. We need to have community involvement. And over the past couple of years in particular, we've seen a significant increase in community involvement with really strong residents associations that have been advocating for the urban forest and also becoming involved in tree planting programs. And so, for example, we have Trees Winnipeg that launched the Winnipeg Relief Program in 2016 to encourage property owners to plant trees on their private properties, particularly those that have lost trees due to Dutch elm disease, but not just that. It's really just to increase the canopy on private properties, and that's where we see a lot of opportunities for reforestation or for increasing our canopy. And Lindsay had mentioned the 1 Million Tree Challenge that was just launched this past fall by Mayor Bowman. And that is a challenge to plant 1 million trees over the next 20 years when it's expected that the population of Winnipeg will reach 1 million. And so we are in the process of working through that with Tree Canada and Trees Winnipeg to implement this, this tree planting program as well. So you can expect to see more information coming over the next several months. But in particular with our comprehensive urban forest strategy, we've had the public engagement pieces were postponed twice over the past several months, first because of the October storm and now because of the pandemic. So we hope to launch our public engagement this coming fall. We're crossing our fingers and hopefully we can do that. So I'm really encouraging all of you to watch out for that, and we hope to see you participate in the public engagement with the workshops and the stakeholder meetings that we will be holding to help develop our urban forest strategy. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha. I guess I'll get started now. You can go to the next slide. My name is Michelle Peka. I'm with the Winnipeg Water and Waste. I'm a senior planning engineer. So our sphere is on the sewer system and the sewage treatment plants for the city of Winnipeg. I've picked two sort of major plans that we have in the city of Winnipeg Water and Waste Department to discuss with you here today, sort of beginning of pipe and end of pipe, and how we've decided to incorporate climate change resiliency into those plans. So starting with the beginning of pipe, the city of Winnipeg has roughly 1/3 of our sewer system as a combined sewer system. And that means that we accept wastewater and rainwater into the same sewer pipe. Normally this isn't a problem, but during large rainstorm events or extreme precipitation events, what can happen is the sewer system can get overwhelmed with rainwater. And instead of going and backing up into streets and basements, it will overflow into our river system. So the city of Winnipeg has put together a combined sewer overflow master plan to mitigate this and reduce the amount of overflow that is going on. And we know that with climate change and more extreme weather events and more extreme rainwater events, that this is a problem that won't go away. The CSO master plan found that gray infrastructure was a good source of mitigation for CSOs, but it wasn't always the best for extreme events. Gray infrastructure can be very expensive and complicated once you start making it very big and very extreme. And here's where the CSO master plan recommended green infrastructure, and it mentioned green infrastructure specifically related to climate change, resiliency, and mitigation, because it found that green infrastructure may have the potential to offset those extreme rainwater events that can happen in our system. So if you could go to the next slide, please. You'll see, here's an example of green infrastructure that we are currently experimenting with. This is it's called a strata cell. So this is located on John Hirsch Place. It's in our theater district in downtown Winnipeg. This was built in 2016. And what it is it's essentially a stormwater retention cell in an urban environment. Normally, what would happen is in a rain event, rainwater would run off the parking lot and down the alleyway into a manhole and directly into the sewer system. But what we've built in here is a series of structural cells filled with sand, and there's a pipe that can connect the rainwater to the sewer system. But it's also connected to trees and other plants. And what will happen is during an extreme rain event, the rainwater will, instead of going directly into the sewer system, it'll filter through this strata cell first. And then stormwater will be retained and then be accessible to the trees. This will offset the peak water that flows in, help store that rainwater so it doesn't overflow directly to the river right away with the wastewater, and it will also give access to water for the trees. So it'll help us during extreme rain events, and it may also help us during extreme droughts to help give the trees an extra source of water. What you can also see here is that if we go to the next slide, that's the there we go. That's the magic. This is the magic cell hidden away. Strata cells are still here. You can see the same parking lot. but now the trees are there and the rainwater will flow through. And what we've done is we've taken some sewer water flow gauging in 2015, so before the strata cell was built, and now in the next few years, we'll be going back and measuring the rainwater flow again to see how much rainwater is stored and captured by these trees. And one thing to note with climate change resiliency and mitigation is that they almost go hand in hand. So in this case, if we find that green infrastructure can help make us more resilient to extreme stormwater events, it can also help us mitigate by providing an extra source of carbon retention through trees and giving a more, more pleasing urban environment as well. So the second program, if we go to the next slide, is a little more, has a slightly more ick factor, but this one's near and dear to my heart because this is something I've been working on for the past 9 years. In our sewage treatment plants, once the wastewater is treated and cleaned and flows to the river, we're left with a solid at the end. It's called a biosolid. It's very nutrient rich and it's also very carbon rich. It has a farm fresh smell associated with it, so it's not always the most easy product to work with. But what we've been doing is traditionally, this product has been we've been using it as a fertilizer source for farmers. We have also been using it for landfilling when we don't have an option for this. So we've been slowly trying to wean ourselves off the landfill because biosolids, being very carbon rich, could also contribute to methane production in the landfill. So by diverting it as a fertilizer for the farmers, it gives them an extra carbon source, helps them improve their soil health, helps us take away from the landfills, and supports soil building. If you go to the next slide. And these are some of the benefits that it gives, not only for us, so we can return carbon to the soil, it also improves drought resistance and replaces chemical fertilizers. So biosolids love water. When we apply it to farmland and incorporate it into the soil, it can help retain water in dry periods. And the farmer that we currently work with in this field has called this biosolids is black gold. He loves this stuff. And we have a wait list with farmers who are asking for this product. So not only are we taking it out of our landfill and providing it to our customers and neighbors around us, we're also helping them with their own climate change resiliency. The second example for biosolids is with our landfill program. So landfills need ongoing care and maintenance. Once a certain section of landfill is filled, we put a clay cap over it to protect it. And what we do with a clay cap is it protects the landfill so that rainwater doesn't filter in and that methane doesn't come out. But Winnipeg is a prairie environment and we're very flat, and landfills tend to raise up over the land. And as you can see here in this particular landfill, this is our Summit landfill, which is near the West Perimeter Highway, the clay cap can get exposed and bare. So what we need to do is figure out a way to make soil to protect the landfill from erosion and wearing away that cap. So on the next slide, we have a program where we want to build soils out of our biosolids waste. So instead of having the biosolids go into the landfill as a waste product and generate methane, we want to keep it out of the landfill and build it as a soil to protect it. We're taking our wastes and we're turning them into resources. And to build it as a soil, what we're doing is we're mixing wood grindings and street sweepings, the two other waste sources, with the biosolids together. And what this does is it creates a soil that will cover the landfill and provide a soil source that we can then grow native plants on to protect it from rainwater. And with climate change, we're going to expect more drought and we're going to expect more extreme precipitation events. So the wearing away and that sort of gray soil cap that you see there, without soil mitigation, would just become more extreme. And we have good hope that this will be a program for us. So this is an example. This is our active landfill at Brady Road. You can see in the middle of the picture there, that's our landfill gas capture system. So this was a closed cell at Brady before there was any biosolid soils applied to it. It was pretty bare. And then on that slide, picture that you just see on your right, you can see afterward that landfill gas system is just on the left side there, close to where the arrow was pointing. And the landfill cap now has been captured and it's green. We still have some bare spots that we have to go touch up, but the soil's been very good for holding the the grasses and the plants, and protecting it from erosion. And that next slide. And that's some examples of how we're building resiliency into our programs for ourselves and for our neighbors. And as a closing comment, I'd just like to say again that building climate change resiliency can also go hand in hand with mitigation. I find that two are often very closely related. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay, Martha, and Michelle for your presentations. So I just wanted to note before we go into the Q&A that we have let the time kind of escape from us, and it's actually 11:28 with this event supposed to be done at 11:30. So I'm assuming there's going to be some questions. I haven't checked the chat box there for a few minutes, but I'm sure there'll be some questions. So I'm going to say now that we're going to go a maximum of 15 minutes over on our time here. Hopefully that's okay with folks. If anyone needs to leave, of course, feel free to do so. But we do want to have a little bit of time to answer any questions that have come up. So I'm going to pass it over to Glenn now, who's going to be taking the questions. And as you can see on your screen here, you can write your question in the Zoom chat box, and you can also text your question to him at the phone number there if you have any problems using the chat box. So it's 11:29 now. So maybe hopefully we can take questions for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll just wrap up briefly. So for those who might be trying to get away quick, we won't take more than 15 minutes more of your time. Okay, thanks, and I'll pass it over to Glenn.
If I can just jump.
Oh, thanks. Hi,
sorry,
Lindsay.
Yeah.
I think I'll read them off, and then you could sort of stick handle them if that's
sorry,
okay.
Glenn, I think Lindsay would just like to introduce the other folks who are on the call now from the city.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we do have the benefit of 3 additional city staff in addition to the ones you heard from in the presentations that have been able to join us recently. So that is Dave Domke, the manager of Parks and Open Spaces, Rodney Penner, our city naturalist, and Kendall Thiessen, our riverbank management engineer.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so we're getting a few questions in right now, and that's excellent. I think the first one's directed towards the city, and the question is, have you ever analyzed the tree canopy across the city by income level in different neighborhoods? Are low-income neighborhoods well covered?
Well, I'll take that one. No, we haven't. We do know that the canopy in the more central part of the city center, is actually the most mature. And there is a good canopy cover there, but we haven't done an analysis on that. So that's something we could look at in our urban forest strategy with the iTree data that we have.
Okay, great. I think this is another question for the city of Winnipeg. Will high performance buildings and deep energy retrofits be part of adaptation strategies for the city of Winnipeg and city of Selkirk in both residential and commercial settings, especially in the context of the large development in Selkirk that Dwayne mentioned?
Okay, so I'll just begin by noting that I would say the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan under the building sector does include a number of directions for Winnipeg to get going on some energy performance program development. I think we've taken the approach of starting with a better understanding and transparency around how our buildings are performing in terms of energy benchmarking and labeling, but certainly at the same time, and the plan recognizes the importance of business case development to support retrofits and energy efficiency of our institutional and commercial buildings, as well as our residential sector. So as new infrastructure, from the city's perspective, as we're looking at new buildings, we're incorporating into that business case to see what kind of retrofits and energy efficiency upgrades beyond code can be completed in support of the climate plan. That being said, I think that buildings, there is overlap in terms of mitigation and adaptation efforts. So, just for example, green roofs can help to support more the adaptation and resiliency side of things. So we would like to explore that further in the development of an adaptation strategy, which is kind of the other half of the coin. And I think you also had directed that question at Selkirk, so I'll hand it over to Dwayne.
Sure, thank you. For the most part, most of our actions have been focused on our corporate actions. So looking to demonstrate leadership, one, because it's controllable, we can actually do those things. But two, just to start normalizing the language and demonstrate that it can be done. And we've taken a pretty extreme approach in terms of our buildings. So all of the new construction will all be non-carbon or extremely low carbon, and all of the retrofits that are going on within the city, as you see, are converting us, moving away from fossil fuel heating and to more sustainable systems. In terms of our large development, we are exploring a district heating potential, and that's in partnership with a large employer or large industrial user in town. But for the most part, we're focused on the corporate side of things and focusing on creating options for citizens to be more sustainable. So our focus with the working with Scott Lift Miller Murray for the concept plan, and a lot of that is about retaining the existing trees and reducing that impact. Looking at creating a large new park and reforesting that area. But the challenge for us is that we're a smaller player in the marketplace, and so for us to provide a lot of incentives or use the stick approach, so like with zoning and eliminating, say, the connection to natural gas or those kind of things, what we're going to see is the development not happening within our community. So what we're looking for and hoping for is more of more leadership from the province to start helping us. We'll be on the innovative end of the spectrum in terms of the marketplace, but we can't be so outside of the marketplace, and that's the challenge that we're having right now.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. Okay, so I've got another question here. It's a long question. I thought the chat might have a limit as to the number of words, but I'll give a quick read here. The solutions to biosolids is really interesting. Thank you. I hear that the City of Winnipeg and the province has not been proactive at all with reducing the amount of phosphorus released into Lake Winnipeg from our North End water treatment facility, and now is worried about the level of sludge produced due to the proposed solutions by organizations such as IISD. Phosphorus is the cause of the deterioration of the health of Lake Winnipeg and the devastating algae blooms. Lake Winnipeg is an invaluable resource to Manitoba and its climate resilience. We need to do our part to help it before expecting other municipalities and provinces to do the same. Winnipeg's North End water treatment facility is the largest point source of phosphorus into Lake Winnipeg. It's the fourth largest emitter of phosphorus out of all the water treatment facilities in Canada. We can't wait years to reduce the phosphorus going into the lake. What is Winnipeg's current plan to address the health of Lake Winnipeg as soon as possible?
So I can speak to some of our plans with respect to phosphorus in Lake Winnipeg. We are in the midst of a multi-year plan to upgrade our 3 sewage treatment plants to remove phosphorus. So in 2008, we had our smallest sewage treatment plant upgraded to remove phosphorus. Now we have our medium-sized sewage treatment plant is currently being upgraded to remove phosphorus, and that should come online in 2022. We've also started the process of upgrading our largest plant, the North End plant. So Council had approved the first phase of a large $1.8 billion project, and that's to upgrade the headworks so that it can be ready to incorporate the phosphorus removal technologies that are out there. And we also, that's all ongoing. We also are part of a project steering committee and a project advisory committee, which includes IISD and Lake Winnipeg, to look at interim phosphorus removal options for our North End treatment plant. So that's in collaboration with the province. We released a plan in January of this year to address the phosphorus problems, and we were in active testing for some of the interim phosphorus removals, but because of the COVID crisis, the University of Manitoba has been shut down. So we'll be releasing new timelines with the province on that in the fall of this year as well.
Glenn, can I just on Selkirk's part, our new wastewater treatment plant that is should be opening this year. It meets and exceeds all of the nutrient removal standards that have been established.
Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, we got a couple of questions now related to funding and money. It seems we can't look at climate resiliency for homes, flood mitigation, tree care, etc., without subsidies to the homeowners, especially low-income families. In what ways will the City of Winnipeg prioritize these?
Okay, so since this relates to homes, I think I'll take a crack at this. So our climate plan, we did try to recognize the equity dimension of a lot of these efforts. You know, I think there was kind of that first generation clean energy programming that really was just available to the people who could afford to do those kinds of new technologies or renewable energy upgrades. So I think a lot of cities, including Winnipeg, wanted to recognize that we need to begin by taking an equity lens and look at any programs we're proposing need to first meet the needs of those most vulnerable and that would most benefit from those. So you'll see in our climate plan that's highlighted as an action around climate equity. I don't have it right in front of me, but what we're doing around that is we have participated, we've jointly applied for a grant through our Canadian network of sustainability directors related to energy poverty issues in our city. And the Federation of Canadian Municipalities provided funding for that program. So Winnipeg is one of the core participating cities, and it's looking at, well, first phase was to really, again, get the data to look at which neighborhoods are most affected by residential energy poverty and where the highest rates of energy poverty are. And now we have a community advisory group as well as a working group that granted has stalled out with COVID, but we're hoping to get them going again soon. So we're looking with that working group. We're partnering with groups like the North End Community Renewal Corporation and Build and Purpose Construction and others to look at some viable solutions that we could present to address energy poverty issues in our city. So that's one project that's ongoing, and that was really made possible through the grant from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So I think I'd probably emphasize how much time, certainly at the Office of Sustainability, we spend on trying to find grants and incentive programs that are being offered. These are typically at the federal level, off through Natural Resources Canada and FCM. Recently, they've announced some funding as well around community energy financing programs that they are hoping cities and provinces can take on that will help deal with energy affordability issues for homeowners. So, you know, you might have heard of PACE financing or local improvement charges being added to municipal utility bills as a way of financing some of these upgrades for homes. And making, you know, those available on an equity basis is a priority. So those are some of the ideas, but I agree it's a significant challenge, and we hope to be addressing it in the coming months and I think years.
Thanks, Lindsay. And another economic question directed towards Selkirk, and maybe Jeff, you could maybe sort of add into the question, the answer. How is the Selkirk climate change adaptation strategy going to be implemented in terms of funding and staffing requirements? And the City of Winnipeg has mentioned some innovative ways to find money to help pay for this. Jeff, if you have examples of what other communities are doing in terms of innovative fundraising, that'd be great to add in. Dwayne?
Yeah, Glenn, I'll just really quick to give some space to Jeff there. But so first of all, much of the money that needs to be spent isn't new money. It's just us spending the money that we have better and making sure that when we're, in fact, it's by not being building a resilient community, we'd be negligent because we're building infrastructure, putting pipes in the ground today that have to be there for the next 80 to 100 years. And if we're not building to meet the climate needs of you know, the next 50 years, we're really just saddling future councils and community members, taxpayers. So it's about using our existing money better. Staffing, again, so we're integrating into our regular business activities and processes. So we're just amending the work that they do, not necessarily creating new. But sometimes we do have to create new work, and so council has been actually very, very supportive. We've built a system, business planning system that allows us to look at life cycle costs versus just the price of infrastructure, and that gives council the political clout or ability, social capital to tell the citizens we're going to spend a little bit more today, but it's actually going to be cheaper in the long run for us. So as an example, the tree inventory, we hired new staff to really do that, or upgraded the staff complement to do that, but in the long run that it'll pay off. And then finally, has been mentioned by the city of Winnipeg, there's federal and provincial and nonprofit grants. So I have a whole team of grant funding ninjas that are out there looking for money so that they can help us do the work that we need to do.
Yeah, I would just add that, and some of the examples I was showing in my presentation is that this climate adaptation and resilience doesn't have to be a really expensive, detailed process, right? There's a lot of things you can do that are simple, low cost. You know, I think I was showing those sort of education and awareness campaigns. There's a lot of things you can do that are really simple, and you can get them done quickly and affordably. And the other thing, I guess Dwayne already touched on, but looking at windows of opportunity. So if you're updating your bylaws, if you're building a new facility, if you're planting trees, putting pipes in the ground, make sure you're considering climate change impacts and all of those things. And the fact that we now have climate change data readily available, there's really no excuse to not, you know, if you're putting a pipe in the ground that's going to be there for 50 years, then you should make sure you're looking at, well, what does the climate look like in 50 years? And so is this tree going to survive in 50 years? Is this building going to be able to withstand the heat that we expect in 50 years? So I think really taking advantage of those projects as they happen. And I think what I've seen with a lot of smaller municipalities is a lot of them hire contractors, right? You hire a contractor to pave your roads or build a sidewalk, and you just write that in the contract or in the RFP that you put out, and you say, hey, contractor, you're paving our roads. Well, look at the projections to 2050 and make sure you put in some asphalt that's going to be able to withstand the climate that we're projecting to see in the 2050s.
Hey, great. We've got time for one last quick question here, and then we'll be able to wrap it up. This is very specific to the city of Winnipeg. What does the urban forest strategy include? All trees such as cemeteries, private trees, golf courses, river corridors?
Yeah, so the urban forest strategy will be, I guess it'll be a broad strategy document, but those trees will be included if we're looking at tree protection and preservation policies and recommendations. So we hope to see the trees in those categories included. We'd also like to see canopy cover targets for land use types. And yeah, so, and you know, a lot of that will also be informed with the public engagement. So we're also looking for feedback from the public and focus stakeholders on what people would like to see included in the urban forest strategy. And just keeping in mind that it is a strategy document with policies and recommendations, which really will provide recommendations for further work and further assessment.
Okay, great. Thanks, Martha. I think that's all the questions and time we have. Emily, any last comments for today?
Yes, thanks, Glenn. So yeah, before we leave each other today, I just want to very briefly explain what's happening next. We're working on a comprehensive report which will be shared with all of you in mid-June. And an important element of that report is going to be an analysis of your responses to the post-webinar survey, which we're going to be sending you hopefully by email tomorrow. But if you don't see it tomorrow, then we'll wait till Monday to send it out, so as not to send it right at the end of the week when it gets lost. So it'll either be coming to you tomorrow or Monday. So watch for that email, and we'll have a deadline to fill out the survey of May 14th. The report is also going to include background research and consider some possible next steps for this project. Our intention here is to continue to drive forward work on climate resiliency in Winnipeg by building relationships, by sharing knowledge, and by seeing where we can all work together for a more resilient city. We don't really know exactly what phase 2 will include yet, but we hope that you will all be a part of it. We would like to thank all of our presenters for sharing their knowledge and all of you for joining us today. We'd also like to acknowledge the support of the City of Winnipeg, the Province of Manitoba, the Winnipeg Foundation, Eco-Canada, and the RBC Foundation. This is not the end of the conversation. We just hope that it's the beginning of the conversation. So everyone stay healthy and safe, and thank you for joining us today. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.